The fantasy football offseason is full of bold predictions, but I didn't see one dang person have on their bingo card this year that Josh Allen would complete more passes to Jets players than Aaron Rodgers in 2023. That's right, it's only been 1 week of the NFL season and there's already major implications to fantasy football around the quarterback position with the injury of Aaron Rodgers already. Now, a lot of people kind of down in the dumps today because of all of this, but you know what? Let me throw out a special offer here. Underdog Fantasy is currently having a special for all new customers. Now, everyone already knows that when you sign up for a new account, you're gonna get your deposit matched up to $100, but now there's a special offer for every new customer that signs up and deposits with a free mystery pick'em. Basically what that is a player who needs like 1 yard in order to hit his pick'em. It'll automatically be thrown into your account. So do this now. Head over to Underdog Fantasy, create a new account, use the promo code Headliners when you do so, and then just make your initial deposit. Like I said, they'll match your deposit up to $100 and you'll have that free mystery pick'em already in your account. Now, maybe you like some good plays there on Underdog. Don't worry, we'll sprinkle in a few pick'ems throughout our start and sit videos every single week. But if you find yourself wanting more, you can always become a member of the channel by hitting that blue join button here just below the video. That'll give you access to our Discord where we talk Underdog pick'ems all week long. But let's get into some football, right? Who's ready for week 2 of the NFL season? Let's kick it off Thursday night football with the Minnesota Vikings and Philadelphia Eagles. And let's kick it off on the Minnesota side of the football because Big Kirko is doing what Big Kirko normally does. Throwing the foosball a lot in week 1. He had 44 pass attempts for 344 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also an interception, but Kirk, my man, you gotta hold on to the ball a little bit tighter because he also had 2 fumbles. Now, it would be great if he could get some help from his offensive line because a bad snap from his center and an unblocked blitzer do not help the situation. Now, like usual with Kirk Cousins, everybody's going to focus on the negative, the interceptions, the fumbles. They're not gonna look at what he did good. Because from a fantasy perspective, he wasn't that bad. Coming into the week, I had him ranked inside my top 10 at the position, and he finished top 10 in the position. He fed Justin Jefferson just like so many fantasy owners would love to see. He included Jordan Addison. That's what we've been talking about for weeks. We saw him find the end zone. TJ Hawkinson, even though he didn't have a huge statistical day, a lot of people want to complain about that, but the tight end position in week 1 was historically bad. And as bad as TJ Hawkinson's stat line was, he was still top 5 at the position. But now Kirk needs to head on the road to Philadelphia. And normally that's not a good thing to do, but we just saw Mac Jones throw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns with arguably the worst wide receiver group in football against this Philadelphia Eagles defense. It's really going to come down to whether or not the offensive line can protect Kirk Cousins from the defensive pass rush of the Philadelphia Eagles. But here's where I have my concerns. As of right now, starting offensive linemen, both Christian Darrisaw and Garrett Bradbury, are questionable to play this week. If they don't have either one of those guys, it's a very big deal, much less either of them. Kirk is going to have to get rid of the ball super, super quick. In a matchup like this on a short week with some injuries on the offensive line, there is nothing safe about this start whatsoever from Kirk Cousins. But it's just so hard to sit Kirk Cousins. It's a high-volume passing offense with multiple high-end pass-catching options, and we know the guy can go out there and put up a stat line similar to last week, right? 344 and 2 touchdowns. You take that this week, I'm sure, but it's not a safe start traveling to Philadelphia on a short week. What about Jalen Hurts? Now, he's going to have a chance to bounce back from a very bad week in week 1 as well. But he's going to get that chance this week going up against Minnesota. We saw Baker Mayfield take advantage of this Minnesota secondary multiple times in week 1. Now, I really expect Philadelphia to try to come out quick in this game. The home opener, it's going to be emotional. They're going to want to get some points on the board early, really get the crowd into the game, try to gain some overall momentum. Now, last week, we know that A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, they were heavily involved in the pass-catching game, but they really couldn't find any of those big plays that we saw so often last year. Heck, Jalen Hurts even barely looked the way of Dallas Goedert, who only had 1 target and 0 receptions last week. To put it into perspective, last week Devontae Smith averaged 6.7 yards per reception, which is almost half of what his career average is. Also last week, A.J. Brown, he was at 11.3 yards per reception. His career average is 16 yards per reception. I'm really looking for Jalen Hurts to have more time in the pocket this week, which is going to allow some of those deeper routes down the field to develop. It's Jalen Hurts. We can never sit him anyway. But now we're going to head over to Sunday football. We're kicking it off with the Green Bay Packers and Atlanta Falcons. And we've been saying it for weeks, and we finally got to see it on Sunday. Jordan Love is not as bad as a lot of people thought he would be. The only reason we weren't higher on him last week was because at the time of the videos, we didn't know if we were going to have Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs. At that time, there was a good chance that both of them missed. However, come game day, Romeo Doubs kind of gutted it out. He played 29 snaps, about half the game on offense, and we really saw why we had him as a huge offseason sleeper. He only had 5 targets in the game, but 2 of them turned into touchdowns, and this guy is going to be an absolute monster in the red zone. Love ended with 245 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and the dude looks super comfortable in the pocket. Even on 3rd and 4th down, he completed 80% of his passes for 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. The biggest question mark for him heading into week 2 is once again the availability of his playmakers. We know Romeo Doubs isn't 100% healthy. Does Christian Watson come back this week? And now we have to worry about Aaron Jones, who tweaked his hammy on that long touchdown reception. Now, as good as Jordan Love is going to play, he needs some of these playmakers on the field, especially going on the road to Atlanta. For now, he is a risk, but if he can get some of these guys, some of these playmakers back available, he's going to slide from the yellow column up into the green because the kid is actually a pretty good quarterback. Now, for Desmond Ridder, not a fantasy option, right? It's even worse than I thought it was going to be in the Atlanta passing game. We haven't been high on Drake London or Kyle Pitts all offseason. The Falcons are built to run and run successfully. Last week in week 1, Desmond Ridder only had 18 pass attempts and they ran the ball 26 times. Now they're going to face off against the Packers defense though, and I have to believe that the Packers defense is better than what Atlanta faced last week in Carolina. The playmakers are there, right? We know that. We know that Drake London is capable. We all believe that Kyle Pitts is capable. We all love Bijan Robinson. But until we really get these guys consistently involved in the pass-catching game, I can't start Desmond Ridder, and I'm pretty sure you're not considering it either. But now let's head down to Buffalo, where the Raiders and Bills are playing this week. And what do you know? Jimmy G doing what Jimmy G does best. Now, he's going to go out there and he's going to win ball games. He's not going to kill your fantasy team, but he's not going to win you very many weeks either. He thrives in that short to intermediate range, and he really takes whatever the defense gives him. Now, for that reason, he's a decent option in 2 quarterback or super flex leagues. He just had 200 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception against a very solid defense in the Denver Broncos and walked away with the win. Solid overall game. No doubt. I'm hoping that they get Jacoby Myers back this week. If he can clear concussion protocol, Jimmy G definitely needs him on the field to help move the chains. But normal 1 quarterback leagues, I can't see him being a top 12 option on the road in Buffalo. Only 10 times in 3 years has Jimmy G scored over 17 fantasy points in a game. I'm pretty sure in 1 quarterback leagues, you're going to have a better option. Now, as for Josh Allen, I don't want to be that guy. But at some point, this dude's going to get the same treatment that other quarterbacks do in the NFL when he has these absolute blow-ups of a game and causes turnovers all over the field. He just lost to a team that lost its starting quarterback in the first series of the game and then got beat by Zach Wilson. And it really is all about the turnovers. 3 interceptions and a fumble, and the interceptions were absolutely horrible. Stupid decisions, forcing the ball deep down the field into double coverage when the short to intermediate game was working just fine. Now, in all fairness, this Jets defense, they're crazy good, right? And we got to give them a lot of credit. But now at least Josh Allen gets to go back home to Buffalo in a better matchup this week, going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Give him a chance to really bounce back and really gain some confidence in himself. He looked like he was beating himself up hardcore after the game on Monday Night Football. Hopefully he bounces back. Obviously, we know, though, we have to start Josh Allen once again, which will then take us to our Manscaped matchup of the week, the Baltimore Ravens and Cincinnati Bengals. If you haven't done so already, be sure to head over to manscaped.com after this show is over. They have everything from ball trimmers, nose hair trimmers, fingernail clippers, deodorant, shampoo, body wash, whatever it is you need, they have you covered. Be sure to use referral code HEADLINERS at checkout so you can get 20% off and free shipping. But I picked this game on purpose because honestly, as a fantasy community, we really need to jumpstart Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow here in 2023, because I think I speak for all fantasy football players when I say what the was that in week one for both of these quarterbacks. They had a combined, between the two of them, a total of 12 fantasy points, and that is not going to cut it. For Burrow, you could tell there was definitely some rust there from not practicing majority of the preseason with his calf strain. But so often I see people criticize the player more so than giving the opposing defense a little bit of credit. That Browns defense is legit as well. We had them as a top 7 defense coming into the season, and they made week one absolutely a nightmare for Joe Burrow. Now this game, not gonna be a lot easier. Joe Burrow only had 5 games in 2022 with only 1 passing touchdown, and 2 of those games came against the Baltimore Ravens. Now with the draft capital you invested in Joe Burrow and the weapons that he has, you really can't afford to sit him. Don't panic just yet though. Don't forget, it was last year in week 1 when Joe Burrow had 4 interceptions in the first game of the year, yet finished as the QB4 overall in fantasy football. For Lamar Jackson, maybe a little bit more worrisome, but once again, we talked about this last week. Last season, the Houston Texans defense was one of the best teams in the league against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 13 fantasy points per game. They then brought in that defensive-minded head coach in DeMeco Ryans, and this defense in Houston does not suck at all, at least through the air. We also need to remember that Lamar did not have arguably his binky out there in Mark Andrews. Lamar already himself came out and said after the game, he actually tweeted it or posted it or X'd it, I don't even know what it's called anymore, and said that he was pretty freaking rusty in week 1. I expect them this week to try to figure out some type of offensive line protection, and I would not be surprised if we don't see Lamar Jackson run more in week 2. But the problem is this: both offensive tackle Ronnie Stanley and center Tyler Linderbaum are not expected to play in week 2, and that is a huge blow, especially to a team that just lost its starting running back in J.K. Dobbins for the year. I have to think we see Lamar Jackson pull the ball down and run for his life in week 2 at times. Now, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. We start Lamar Jackson each week, and we're hoping for a bounce back in week 2. Now, let's head down to Seattle and the Detroit Lions. And who the hell let 2023 Geno Smith back in the building? Geno's performance in week 1 was worse than any game he had in the entire season of 2022. This guy was under constant pressure, and he will be once again against this Detroit front if the Seattle offensive linemen can't get healthy. Both starting tackles, Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross, left week 1 and are questionable to play here in week 2. Now, I will definitely give some credit to that Rams defense, but overall, the offensive line play in Seattle really led to their demise in week 1. I didn't expect the Rams defense to play as good as they did, though. Now, Aiden Hutchinson could have himself an absolute day against this team if this offensive line can't get some of these pieces back, especially with Detroit coming off an emotional win in Kansas City and now going to be at home. There's going to be a lot of emotion in that stadium. Now, obviously, I love that Geno Smith still has plenty of weapons at his disposal to put up good numbers. But until we hear about that offensive line and their availability for week 2, you have to expect some huge risk for Geno Smith. Now for Detroit, obviously, like I said, they're coming off that emotional win against Kansas City. They're coming into this game with some confidence, and we've seen this team with confidence before, and they're actually pretty good. There's plenty of room for this offense to grow as well. More touches coming the way of Jahmyr Gibbs, more big plays down the field to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I loved what I saw in the very first week of Sam Laporta. Not flashy, but he's really going to help this team, help this offense, extend drives, get first downs, and that is a great thing. It keeps the offense on the field more. We also just saw the Seattle Seahawks defense give up 334 yards receiving to the Los Angeles Rams. But what about a little history? Did you know that Jared Goff hasn't had an interception since week 9 of last season? He's only 44 pass attempts away from breaking Tom Brady's all-time record of 399 straight passes without an interception. Will we be watching some history in week 2? We just might. Now, no reason why Detroit can't find some similar success to what we saw with the Rams last week. I'm rolling with Goff as a fringe top 12 option here in week 2, which will then take us down to the Indianapolis Colts and Houston Texans, and I knew it. I give you all advice all the time, and then I didn't even follow it myself. I have said for years in videos in the preseason, always trust your gut. Then in last week's quarterback video, I said verbatim, my gut says to start Anthony Richardson and watch him go the hell off, but my head says to give it a week. I should have listened to my gut because Anthony Richardson was a top 5 play at the position in his very first regular season game as a pro. He went 24 for 37 for 223 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 40 yards rushing, and a rushing touchdown as well. And now we know we have another injury in this backfield to Evan Hull, which means even more rushing upside is going to be going the way of Anthony Richardson. But don't forget, we've already talked about this Houston Texans defense once in this video. Remember when I said they allowed the second fewest points to quarterbacks in 2022, added the defensive coach, and then they just limited Lamar Jackson and the Ravens last week? This isn't some easy start by any means for Anthony Richardson. Don't just see that he's facing the Houston Texans and assume it's going to be some type of cakewalk. But what's great is he's already shown us, even in just 1 week, he has the ability to cross that 20-point threshold. That's like something we've talked about with Kenny Pickett for a little over a year now, right? We're trying to find that consistency. We're trying to find that ceiling. At least we've somewhat seen a little bit of it from Anthony Richardson, even in just 1 week. But don't kid yourself, though. There is some risk here to start him here this week if you decide to make that choice. As for CJ Stroud, his first game was not as good as Anthony Richardson, but it was expected, right? He didn't play bad. He threw the ball 44 times for 242 yards, no touchdowns, added 20 yards rushing on the ground as well, but also lost a fumble. He spread the ball around nicely, but they could never really get the run game going in Houston last week. They're gonna have to try again this week, though. If they want to open up the passing game and really help out CJ Stroud, they need to find success on the ground. Until we can really see CJ Stroud start to put the ball in the end zone, he's not going to be somebody we can trust for fantasy football. Which will then take us down to Jacksonville, where the Chiefs and the Jags are going to be playing this week, and there's a lot of excitement around this game. Mahomes got the best of Trevor Lawrence in both games last year, including the playoffs. In the 2 games against Jacksonville, Mahomes had a combined 526 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 1 interception, with 47 rushing yards to go along with it. And you have to think that the Chiefs are going to try to do whatever they can to not go 0-2 here to start the season, but let's be honest, they really need Travis Kelce in this offense. They were absolutely lost without him. Now, Kadarius Toney, he dropped the ball figuratively and literally all week long. Sky Moore couldn't get a catchable target and screwed over a lot of people in week 1. For sure expected more out of him last week. And Mahomes had to throw the ball to 12 different receivers. Now, luckily, Patrick Mahomes always seems to find a way to rack up some fantasy points for his owners. But you never sit Patrick Mahomes. You already know that. We're just hoping that this is the week that Travis Kelce can keep the swelling out of his knee and find his way back on the field for a potential shootout against the Jags. Now for Trevor Lawrence, no chance you really sit Trevor Lawrence either. We just saw Jared Goff and the Lions beat this Kansas City Chiefs team on the road in Arrowhead. So you have to think that the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to come out fired up in their season opener at home. Really, the only issues we saw last week with Trevor Lawrence was the turnovers. You can't have 3 turnovers in a week. It absolutely kills your fantasy season, especially when one of them is Tank Bigsby, who basically just picks up a fumble and stops playing. It's apparent, though, that the addition of Calvin Ridley into this offense is going to help the ceiling of Trevor Lawrence. Calvin really silenced a lot of his haters week 1 with his very first 100-yard game. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to head over to Underdog Pick'ems right now, and I'm going to smash the higher on Trevor Lawrence's passing yards of 259.5. I expect him to eclipse that mark here this week. Now, one thing to definitely pay attention to here is Chris Jones has signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, so now Trevor Lawrence may have a little bit more pressure in his face this week. However, still no way you can afford to sit this guy with this potential in this offense. Now we go down to Tampa Bay, though, for the Bears and the Bucks, and welcome to Tampa Baker. Don't look now, but Baker Mayfield is 1-0 and on the road back to the Bake Show. That's in full swing right now, because a confident Baker Mayfield is a dangerous Baker Mayfield, and that first game had to build a little bit of confidence. He looked good in the pocket. We already know that he has weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and now he gets a matchup at home against the Bears defense that was just picked apart by Jordan Love and the Packers. Now, I'm not going to go full hype mode here on Baker whatsoever, but we are on full Geno Smith 2022 watch with the resurgence potentially of the career of Baker Mayfield. He is not someone that I would feel comfortable starting in a 1-quarterback league in week 2 of fantasy football. But in Superflex, in 2 QB leagues, he really needs to be paid attention to. If he can string together a couple good games in a row, he could be a high-end quarterback 2 in fantasy football here this year. Now for Fields, everybody has basically already written him off, which is pretty funny. All the people that play fantasy football that think that Justin Fields sucks or is garbage can't seem to differentiate between NFL play and fantasy play. And last week is a perfect example. We'll see the comments throughout the week of how Justin Fields is trash, yet he outscored Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, Lamar Jackson, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones, and Joe Burrow last week. And I sure don't see those guys getting a whole lot of hate. Now, we don't need Justin Fields to go out there and be Joe freaking Montana on the field. We need fantasy points. And in a bad game, for him to score like 16 points is still pretty good. Ask all the Joe Burrow owners if they would like to have those 16 points this past week. I'm sure they would. Now, what makes it even crazier is he had 2 turnovers last week, an interception and a fumble. If he didn't have just at least one of those, he would have had enough points to finish inside the top 10 at the position. You have to stop judging him as a pocket passer quarterback. He will never be that. You follow the points in fantasy football. Now, last week, Kirk Cousins threw for almost 350 yards and 2 touchdowns on this Tampa Bay defense. Now, this is not the same offense style in Chicago. I understand that. But the rushing upside is why we still like him in this offense. And that's why so many people drafted him so high. If you really stop expecting 350 and 3 touchdowns a week from Justin Fields and you just look at the points he's going to score, it'll make you feel a lot better about starting him each and every week. But now we head up to Tennessee for the Titans and the Chargers, and what a matchup we saw last week between Justin Herbert and Tua. But by the end of the day, a lot of people, myself included, probably expected a little bit more from Justin Herbert. He ended the week with 228 yards passing and 1 touchdown, 18 yards rushing, and a touchdown on the ground as well. He still finished as the quarterback 6 overall on the week and was only 8 points shy of being the number 1 guy overall. Could he have been better? Sure. But he wasn't bad by any means. And now we know that Austin Eckler himself is dealing with some sort of an ankle injury and is questionable to play here in week 2 at the time of this recording. Plus, you have to expect, as the season goes on, we start to see more and more Quentin Johnston on the field. And they really need to do that. We need more deep balls in this offense. In week 1, Justin Herbert only had a total of 43 air yards. For comparison, in that same game, Tua had 310 air yards. Well, this is the week that it could happen because the Tennessee defense has been bad against opposing quarterbacks for a long time now, and they're a lot easier to throw on than they are to run on. We know we start Justin Herbert. What about Ryan Tannehill? We also know that we do not start Ryan Tannehill. We give him DeAndre Hopkins. Give him a healthy Treylon Burks. Give him Derrick Henry. And what do you get? Sub 200 yards passing and 3 interceptions. No way he is sniffing a fantasy lineup until he shows some sort of offensive consistency. And then we head over to Arizona for the Arizona Cardinals and New York Giants. And did anybody else see this matchup and just kind of go, and just gag a little bit? It's a team that just lost 40-0 in the New York Giants, and a team that on paper looks like they couldn't beat the little Giants, much less the real Giants. But we already know as fantasy players, we're not going to start Josh Dobbs. Even though the Cardinals kept the game close in week 1, I'm not into starting a quarterback that has a stat line of like 130 yards passing and no touchdowns. How about for the Giants though, and Daniel Jones? He looked absolutely horrible on Sunday Night Football. But that Dallas defense is arguably one of the best in the league, so we have to give them credit. They were playing in very bad weather. The rain was coming down heavy. Now this should be a much better matchup for Daniel Jones here this week. However, until we see this offense kind of turn it around, there's going to be a ton of risk in starting Daniel Jones in fantasy football. The saving grace for him to bounce back is going to be the rushing upside. He had 13 rushing attempts last week, and if he can flirt with 10 plus each week, all of a sudden he may creep back up into one of those guys who is a little bit safer to start. However, this is another team dealing with some injuries on the offensive line. 2 guys questionable to play, Andrew Thomas and Matt Pert. They need them on the field to really help produce some of that rushing upside for Daniel Jones. Now, nowhere to go but up for Daniel Jones and the Giants from last week, but there is still a ton of risk for him here, and he will not be inside my top 12 this week. But now we head over to LA for the Rams and the Niners, and Brock Purdy is that dude. Last year was not a fluke. I think we can all say that now. Dude just strolled in to Pittsburgh against a really good Pittsburgh defense and put up 30 points. He finished week 1 as a top 10 quarterback in fantasy football, had 220 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and 20 yards rushing. He showed the chemistry that he has with Brandon Ayuk. He didn't even have a 100% healthy George Kittle. Now, a lot of Rams fans are going to tell you that, hey, don't count us out too early. Our defense is still elite. But Geno struggled a lot last week, partially due to the injuries on his offensive line to both of his starting offensive tackles. This offensive line in San Francisco is light years better. Purdy actually never faced the Rams last year after he took over the starting job, but the way that he looked in week 1, this kid going forward is probably going to be a fringe top 12 play. Now for Stafford, I've said now for 2 seasons, no Kupp, no start of Stafford. So far, that's really held true, but Matthew Stafford just threw for over 300 yards on Seattle just last week, really feeding guys like Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell. But the issue here is 2 things. 1, the touchdown upside without a Cooper Kupp in the offense is drastically lower, and 2, they're playing against the San Francisco 49ers defense. This defense just held an offense that many people loved in Pittsburgh to only 7 points last week. There's a time and a place to take a risk in fantasy football, but this just isn't it just yet. Now we go over to Dallas for a defensive juggernaut of a matchup between the New York Jets and the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I'll get to the Jets in a second because that damn situation kind of makes me sick if I'm being honest. But what's crazy is the Cowboys just scored 40 points last week and Dak had 0 touchdowns. I didn't even think that was possible. He finished the game with 143 yards passing, no touchdowns, no interceptions, and 6 yards rushing. He was quarterback 29 on the week. Now he faces a defense in the New York Jets that just backhand slapped Josh Allen and forced 4 turnovers. I'm going over to underdog right now, and I'm going to hit the lower on Dak's passing yards of 236.5. I don't know if I can feel safe starting any quarterback against this defense right now of the New York Jets, especially even seeing that Zach Wilson scored more points in week 1 against Buffalo in relief than Dak did last week in a 40-point blowout. I get that there may be some fantasy teams out there that have to start Dak Prescott, but I am worried about the potential upside for him in this one. Okay, now, on to the Jets, and this really sucks. Now, no, I am not a Jets fan, but after watching Hard Knocks, I was definitely looking forward to seeing what this team could be with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. I guarantee no one on their 2023 bingo card had that Josh Allen would complete more passes to Jets players than Aaron Rodgers, but here we are. Zach Wilson looks to try to resurrect his career as the new starting quarterback of the New York Jets. Now, of course, we really haven't seen a whole lot from Zach Wilson in his career up until this point, but I do expect the team to go out and get another veteran quarterback sometime soon. Who do I think is best? I mean, they may not be sexy options, but if we could work a trade for like a Gardner Minshew or a Jameis Winston. I know Matt Ryan is still sitting out there as well. Don't know if I'm overly interested in Matt Ryan. Really need to see what Zach Wilson does here in the short term, because there's been a lot of money spent in New York and the window is very short for them to try to make something happen. I can't see them just tanking rest of season. Irregardless, though, this team is going to become very run-heavy and rely on its defense to keep every game super close to give them a shot at winning. Breece Hall looked amazing last night. At times, Dalvin Cook looked really good as well. That running game overall for the Jets looked great, and we already talked about the defense. From a fantasy perspective, though, I don't see us starting a Jets quarterback anytime soon. But now we head out to Denver for the Broncos and the Washington Commanders, and Russell Wilson, I guess, looked better-ish, kind of. That's like the best I can say, I think. They still lost the game. The offense still scored less than 20 points in a game. That's happened now in 11 of the 16 starts that Russell Wilson has had there. He only threw for 177 yards, but did have 2 passing touchdowns. One to Cortland Sutton and one to Lil Jordan Humphrey. What I can say as of right now, though, even though we're super early in this very young season, is Russell Wilson is really going to lack that higher ceiling until they at least get the likes of Jerry Jeudy back in this offense. The leading receiver for the Broncos last week was Samaje Perine with 37 yards, and that cannot be the case if you want to have a fantasy viable quarterback. Now they get a matchup against the Washington Commanders, and it's going to be really hard to gauge what this defense really is. Chase Young is out, but in week 1, they faced the Arizona Cardinals, and we already really know that Josh Dobbs isn't some high-tier quarterback in the NFL. Now, I do feel like Russ is going to be better in 23 than he was in 22, but as far as a top 12 option, probably not. And I can really say a lot of the same things for Sam Howell this week. I do consider him a solid quarterback too in fantasy football, but not somebody I'm rushing to start as a quarterback 1. It was great that he had Terry McLaurin out there on the field, though, for 89% of the snaps. That was not expected here about a week ago. Now, he has the ability to feed McLaurin and Dotson, but what I found pretty odd is that he didn't air it out as much as I expected in week 1. Now, those 2 wide receivers only combined for 11 targets, and Dotson only averaged 8 yards per reception. He also didn't scramble very much, did Sam Howell, only had 11 yards rushing, but was able to find the end zone on one of those carries, which we absolutely love in fantasy football. He's still a guy to watch, but not a guy I can start just yet. And then we go to Sunday Night Football, New England Patriots, Miami Dolphins, and who would have thought that this matchup right here would have been the matchup in week 2 with the number 1 overall quarterback and number 2 overall quarterback in fantasy football, Tua and Mac Jones. Now for Tua, how much longer is it going to take for this guy to actually start getting a little bit more love? He went out there last week and almost threw for 500 yards, and there's still people leaving comments that he has a noodle arm. That has to be one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. It's the speed in this offense that really takes Tua to another level. The speed of his playmakers takes a lot of the pressure off of him. But this defense that they're going to face this week in New England, I have to expect to play a little bit better than what they saw last week in LA for the Chargers. This defense just limited Jalen Hurts to only 170 yards passing and 1 touchdown. With the ceiling that Tua has, though, in this offense, with so many big plays, he's borderline a weekly must start at this point. Now, more than likely this week, he's going to be a Verge top 12 guy for me in my rankings and somebody that I don't hate starting. However, when I look at this matchup, I don't see ceiling. I see a little bit of a safer floor just due to the New England defense. But what about Mac Jones? Free Mac Jones in this non-Matt Patricia offense. So much better than what we saw almost all of last year. Last season, he only had 2 games of 300 yards passing all season long. He already has 1 through 1 game this season in 2023. And then how about this? He only had 1 game in 2022 where he threw for 3 passing touchdowns. He's already done that this season too. And he's doing it with guys like Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas. Like, what the hell is going on with this offense? Bill O'Brien, way better than Matt Patricia. But now they get a matchup going up against Miami. And you have to think that this matchup should be a little bit easier than going up against the Philadelphia Eagles defense. Plus, if Miami can find a way to get the ball in the end zone a couple times, that's going to force New England to have to throw the ball all 4 quarters. Now, in no way whatsoever is Mac Jones a safe start in fantasy football. But we just talked all offseason on how this offense should be better in 2023 than it was in 2022, so it's encouraging to see the start of the season go the way that it did. Mac Jones could easily go off once again here this week and be one of the top quarterbacks in fantasy football, but we need consistency in this game. There's a lot of high-end quarterbacks in the NFL. If we can find the consistency for a few weeks with Mac Jones, then we consider starting him, but for now, I'm not taking the risk. Which will then take us to Monday Night Football, where we have a doubleheader this week. The first game, New Orleans Saints and Carolina Panthers, and it's going to be fun to see the #1 overall pick, Bryce Young, and what he can do in primetime football. Not really a fantasy football option just yet. His leading receiver last week was Hayden Hurst, and he only had 41 yards receiving. Plus, this Saints defense just forced Ryan Tannehill to throw 3 interceptions. We're not risking the start of Bryce Young. As for Derek Carr, though, I don't hate it. Carolina suffered an injury to one of their starting defensive backs, J.C. Horn, just last week. He's questionable to play in week 2, and we're seeing exactly what we expected from Derek Carr in New Orleans. A lot of pushing the ball deep down the field to his receivers. In week 1 of the season, Derek Carr had 4 wide receivers that averaged 12 yards per reception or more, and I really don't see why they can't do that again in Carolina this week. Derek Carr going to be hovering right around my top 12 once again. And then lastly, another divisional matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers and Cleveland Browns. And the Steelers, they have to bounce back, right? I mean, they faced the 49ers defense, which is absolutely great. But this Cleveland defense is pretty freaking good too. They just made Joe Burrow and the Bengals look like your local 3A high school team in week 1. Then we add in the fact that we've lost Deontay Johnson to a hamstring injury. We have tight end Pat Freiermuth dealing with a chest injury. Now, I would love to say, hey, it's okay, the Steelers are going to be at home. They were at home last week too, and it didn't really help much. Until we can prove that he has a safer floor, Kenny Pickett is not going to be a starting quarterback for me in fantasy football. As for Deshaun Watson, fantasy-wise, he didn't have a bad day whatsoever. 154 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, added 45 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown as well. But was it just me? And maybe it was. It just didn't seem like Deshaun Watson had the arm strength that I really remember him having. Now, I'm not saying it's not good by any means. Calm down, Browns fans. It just didn't seem to have the same zip on it that I remember that it once had. Now, what will definitely continue to keep him fantasy viable is that scrambling ability that we just saw last week. It's naturally starting to come back to him a little bit more, and that will give him a huge boost all year long. Now, it does suck that the Browns have lost starting offensive tackle Jack Conklin to a torn ACL. That guy is one of the best tackles in the entire league and is definitely going to be a big blow to that offensive line. Now, I wouldn't classify Deshaun Watson as this safe guy this week going into Pittsburgh. However, he will be another one of those guys hovering inside my top 12. If Brock Purdy can go into Pittsburgh and do what he did, so can Deshaun Watson. I do think that Mike Tomlin and the Steelers kind of right the ship a little bit, and that's why I'm showing a little bit of risk for Watson, but the ceiling is definitely still there. All right, but that's going to go ahead and do it for our quarterback starts and sits here for week 2. Hopefully I was able to give you some information to make your decisions a little bit better. Our rankings will be out here on Thursday morning, though, so be sure to look out for those. Now, before I get out of here, I actually just received a memo from the NFL. They said if this video could get over 2,500 likes, that your quarterback has a better shot of getting over 25 fantasy points. So, hey, do your part to hit that like button, and then also do your part to make the world a better place.